Hello, Shadow Era community, and welcome back again to State of the Era, the podcast presented by the A1 Alliance to bring you the best Shadow Era discussion around. You are hearing the absurdly sexy voice of NinjaDucky. We have a very interesting episode today for you. We're mixing it up a little bit with two members of the design team here with us, so it's going to be pretty interesting. We've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about with the quick match rating reset that's coming up. And we're going to give you guys some tips on how to beat some of the more annoying decks that people have been playing. But before we get started, let's introduce who we've got on the show. Today, we're talking with CwhitTastic.
What's up, guys?
We're talking with design team member Razcrux.
Hi, everyone.
We have Jacqui from the A1 Alliance.
Hey, guys.
And design team member Soothslyr.
Everyone.
All right, so before we get started, Raz, we've never had you on before, so why don't you introduce yourself, tell people a little bit about you, how long have you been playing Shadow Era, where are you from, and what's your favorite Shadow Era deck of all time?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sebastian, or Raz, and I'm working on the design team. We're a team divided into different primary roles, and my primary role is doing game design, which means coming up with cards, new expansions, working on the single-player campaign, and so primarily a creative kind of function. But balance, of course, comes into it as well. I'm not the balance end responsible. That's Mojumbo, Trevor, but of course, design can't be completely separated from balance. So I also look a lot at what the current meta is and what different heroes need or don't need and what fits with their style and stuff like that. Sorry, what was your next question? How long have I been playing?
Yes.
I started, is it only a year ago? I guess it's only a year ago. Last summer, I think it was June. At that time, Majaya had a 2 shadow energy ability and could draw all the time, so I just kind of avoided playing that hero.
Didn't want to have the noob tube stamp on you?
I don't know. I generally like to always root for the underdog, and I like to try and win with heroes that are the ones you're not supposed to win with. I kind of like the challenge and more of a puzzle than a grinding challenge to get to the top rating. I'm not really a fanatic of getting to 300 plus or something like that. So,
Well, can I comment that it's kind of awesome that I haven't heard the term noob tube used to describe any hero in a while.
Yeah, I've actually been saying it a lot since Kill Trend came back to the forums. It just brought back all this nostalgia of when he was running around calling Magia the great noob tube, and
Yeah. Bring back the glory days of Sally Noob Cakes.
Now there's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
You should talk to Blanket Effect more. It comes up far too often.
So Raz, what would you say your favorite deck that you've ever had of all time in Shadow Era would be?
oh, I don't know. It's kind of rotated around. I've had a lot of fun. What version was it? It was when the heroes got all their abilities changed by Calm Down, so that Majai wouldn't have a 2 shadow energy. I had a lot of fun playing Elementalists at that time, and I actually did a lot of. I remember crafting like crazy to try and beat Logan in a loud win, because of course that's the only thing you'd find. And every time I would beat Logan, I would just jump up and cheer because it was like a momentous occasion.
But it always felt really good when it happened.
Yeah, champagne.
Oh yeah, it was extremely satisfying. It was like the ultimate challenge. Can you actually beat Logan with the worst possible matchup? Because of course Logan doesn't care how big your ally is. You can pump it as much as you like; it'll still be killed in one hit. So it was a satisfying challenge because it could be done. It was just hard.
Right. Yeah, that was actually at a time when fatties were being driven out of the meta by Logan because he couldn't afford to drop like 5 or 6 cost guys because Logan would just kill them every single time.
Yeah, I remember I was using a lot of Shadow Knight and Belladonna looping, so I was getting draw, and then if I saw Logan, I think I had like 4 Bazaars and 4 Bad Santas. So I was actually playing a high-cost deck, but I would just try and flood the board with card and with allies and recursion so that Logan would just kind of get overwhelmed. That was my my strategy against him at the time.
So weird to hear Logan being like feared.
Yeah, that was before your time, wasn't it, Seawit?
It's weird.
Oh,
It's like saying Baduru's badass or something.
Yeah, that's kind of true. Although there was an old
Times will come
threat
again, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Dun,
one of
dun,
these
dun.
days, that statement will be true. I promise. I swear, one of these days.
No, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, when we got design team members, 2 design team members on the cast saying, keep an eye on Baduru in the future. There's
Awesome.
your spoiler for the future, guys.
Well, we want all heroes to be
Yeah.
viable, of course, so we don't want any to be left in the dust if we can help it.
Cool.
Of course. So let's get on about this quick match thing. Apparently, there's going to be a quick match reset this weekend, which may have already happened by the time I get this episode posted. I'm not sure, because I have a busy weekend. But for now, we're going to talk about the upcoming quick match ratings reset. With that, there's going to be a lot of people. A lot of you guys are going to try to get out there and race to the top 20 for your ratings again. And this time it's going to be very different than it was the first time because everyone knows their decks, they know the meta, they know a lot more. It's not as experimental as it was the first time around.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a few decks out there, though, that tend to give people a lot of grief, and you see a lot of rants in the Shadow Era forums complaining that this thing is overpowered or it can't be beaten or I hate it, take it out of the game. So I want to talk about some of that stuff because we've got some tournament winning players here, we've got some design team members here, so we can try to help you guys with those really annoying and frustrating matchups and how to play against them, or if you want to take them on and play as them, what you should be doing, and really just go over that sort of meta in detail. So first up to the plate, I think we have the most annoying deck that has ever been available in all of Shadow Era's history, Millstalker. What do you guys think about Millstalker? What's a good way to win against Millstalker, first of all, because people really hate it and lose to it a lot?
Oh man, Millstalker. Okay, so first thing I want to say is I don't think people should be that afraid of Millstalker because, especially if you've played it before, I think as you play it, you realize that it's a little bit nerve-wracking to be playing Millstalker because it's weird facing a wall of allies and just not hiding and just being afraid of what you're going to draw next or things like that. So don't be too worried when you're playing a Millstalker, first of all, because there's really easy ways to beat it, and I'm sure we'll all talk about that. First easiest way, in my opinion, to beat a Millstalker is, well, to be Shadow. It's easier as Shadow because you have a lot of certain allies. So first up is Garg, because Millstalker relies on Evil Ascendant. It's a card that takes away 1 health of all the allies on the board, but Garg's immune to it, so that's a good thing to have. Another good thing to have is Bad Wolf because it heals 1 turn every turn on your turn. And so if you have that, just a really quick side note on Bad Wolf, you don't always have to attack with Bad Wolf when it's available, because if you attack with it, then he'll be able to kill it with a speed strike. So a lot of things, people might not realize this, but don't ever attack with Bad Wolf because he'll take that hit and you'll never be able to heal to full health. So always keep Bad Wolf just waiting to attack. And then obviously other Shadow allies that are great are Shadow Knight to keep recursing. Plasma Behemoth is a really big pain in the ass for a Millstalker player. And then last but not least is Molten Destroyer, because with Evil Ascendant, the Millstalker will take a damage every time that the Molten Destroyer takes a hit. So essentially, if you have 1 to 2 out, you can really minimize the healing of Millstalker. I'll stop there. I'm sure you guys all have stuff to add, but that's a really good way to beat it as Shadow. And then really, even if you have all those things, the hero for Shadow doesn't matter as much, but obviously heroes that can do some burn damage, like Madge or Gravebone's actually in like an auto win versus Millstalker, but Madge and Zaladar is really good too because of his blast, his ability. But really, you can beat Millstalker with any Shadow hero, in my opinion, with those allies. So.
Well, I don't know. I think that Millstalker, it's a very boom or bust type of hero where it depends upon whether or not your opponent was anticipating they were ever going to come across a Millstalker deck, and they had contingencies built in their deck for that, or if they figured they'll plan for everything else but Millstalker. Millstalker cannot lock the board for too many turns in a row without giving you the possibility of shooting through it. What I mean by that is Shadow. There's at least 2 cards that completely ruin Millstalker's strategy. Millstalker's strategy is blocking with is shielding, because it's not even really milling so much as it is stalling. So it's shielding with the ability, rain delay,
Full moon.
full moon.
Full moon.
Yeah, full moon. There's a couple of cards that they use to do that. Well, when you're playing against Millstalker, you wait to shoot the gap. You play cards like Shrine of Negatia, which has seen surgence in popularity recently. I'm not sure how much bust he had to do with that, which he used it in the World Championship and obviously did well. And Shriek. Those are the 2 main cards that, as a Millstalker, you fear. Because when there's always going to be a turn where you just can't use your ability for full blockage and just staring down a wall of allies, and your crescendo just hasn't fully charged up yet. And if they use a Shriek on that full moon and just go straight for the hero and pound you, that's it for you. I mean, or if they use Shrine of Negatia and send your full moon back, if they that causes a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that's why I was saying with the allies, like when you can have a lot of allies out, that's why Shadow's the easiest, because it's immune to EA, so you can just wait for that.
Yeah, I mean, Millstalker is also another reason why we've seen an uptake in Sandworms being played as well. Because Sandworms, we all know they're tanks. They can take just tons of hits. They're great against Lance decks. They're great against Amber decks. They're great against weapon heroes in general. And Millstalker has an issue with them as well, because you only have 4 captured prey, and retreat is your enemy. Because if you captured prey, a Sandworm, and they just retreat it and play it back down again, that's not boding well for you. So Millstalker, it wins a lot of matches out, because, I mean, obviously if it didn't, it wouldn't be worth talking about. But it's not as unbeatable as a lot of people think. It's just, you have to know how to play that match.
Definitely.
What do you think, Jacqui? Do you agree with the analysis so far?
So far, I'd just like to add another ally that was missed was DMT.
Oh shit, I forgot that one, my bad.
Yes.
That blasts through, the skill. And also, I think every Shadow hero can beat Millstalker. So it's definitely not a good hero to bring, like, in a tournament, just because everyone runs Shriek, and they all have the Shadow allies.
Yep.
Well, one thing I want to also add to this is that a lot of Millstalkers, I mean, I've seen a couple of different variants to it, and the more recent variant that I've seen is actually a little bit more stable than the others, where it's not completely allyless, where it relies on cycling Shadow Knights for that extra bit of damage for board management. Where if you have 3 Shadow Knights or 4 Shadow Knights, come the mid to late game, you can start cycling them, and your opponent can't kill all of them without direct attacking. So through, blocking with hiding with your ability, rain delays and such, that you eventually get 1 or 2 that last in the field just long enough for you to kind of mitigate the board, so that even if they Shriek you, it's not exactly a complete kill shot. So right. I mean, it's that's a variation of it that doesn't quite try to mill you as much as it plays to control a little bit more than just stalling. So yes. That's one that's a little bit more viable than the rest.
Another thing that is really clutch to me against the Millstalker is Severed Ties. I don't think that can be overestimated. That's a card that comes in and out of the meta. We saw it when it got a really big amount of use when the meta first started up, and people have started to be including it a little bit less lately. But that is a card that, I mean, if you can remove the captured praise from your allies, if you can remove Lone Wolf to kill Millstalker's healing for a while, those are things that can be extremely important to shutting down Millstalker and getting him with a sort of surprise move that screws up his plan for the next several turns.
Definitely. Millstalker cannot win without Lone Wolf. That's the reason why it's so scary, is because it can heal away a lot of damage.
Okay, I was watching another match where they had 4 item destruction and they just destroyed all the big teeths.
That works too.
I just wanted to add 2 things to the Millstalker. The first is, I would say that most likely his days are numbered. I'll just say that. And from a design perspective. And then when I did face Millstalker one time on Quick Match, I haven't found him to be that popular that I encountered him a lot, but I did face him once, and as soon as I noticed it was a Millstalker deck, I basically just started stalling as well.
Yes.
And I had the joy of watching Millstalker mill himself. I mean, that's basically how he died to my deck. I just, when it was time to draw, I'd just keep a hand of 7. He didn't have a hand of 7, and he just milled himself out, and then I just countered whatever he was doing. And it's a slow game, but I didn't find it. If you like you have all said, if you have the cards that you need in order to counter what he's doing, so if you can counter the weapons or the healing, or just have some allies, or just wait. I basically just waited a really long time before I actually started applying pressure until he was more than halfway through his deck, and then only at that point did I start putting allies down, etc. So there's because he can heal, there's really no rush to apply the pressure because he's not going to do a lot of damage to you in return either. So that was my strategy.
That's also true.
It's exactly what I was going to say when now that we swung around, I was going to talk about human for a second, because as human, the ally, you can't rely on them as much. And what you just said is exactly how human beats Millstalker. Because a lot of people get really scared when they see Millstalker and they're human, but really all you have to do to beat it is just wait, exactly like you said, because eventually the Millstalker will run out of cards. And he can only hide for so many turns. And if you don't mill yourself, the Millstalker is forced to mill itself. So if you just play, a couple allies at a time or whatever, even just one big one, the Millstalker is forced to hide as long as you can deal more damage than it can heal in that specific turn, if that makes sense. You just need to be able to constantly make him a little bit afraid enough to hide, and then just don't do anything else besides that, and eventually you're going to win.
Yeah, another thing, following up on that, milling the Millstalker strategy, I've seen in a couple of pop-ups, people have been playing Zaladar and packing 1 or 2 Eternal Renewals in their deck, which will allow your deck to essentially now, instead of playing with a 40-card deck, you're playing with a 60 or 70-card deck, and that's just way more. Millstalker runs out of cards so much longer before you do, and you can constantly be pinging away his healing with your shadow ability. So that's another viable tactic to taking Millstalker out, and it's always deliciously ironic to mill a Millstalker, like what Raz was saying.
Deliciously ironic. I like it.
That's a good phrase. One thing I was going to add, though, is you mentioned the possibility of carrying Sever Ties and how it's floated in and out of popularity. You and I had a discussion a little earlier about the difference between carrying Sever Ties versus some of the other alternatives in your different decks as counters to Millstalker. And one of the things I realized is that it really depends upon which hero you're using. Because I found that Sever Ties actually works really well as a mage deck, where a lot of your damage output is from your burn.
Yep.
And carrying Sever Ties slows down his healing to give you the possibility of getting your kill shot with your your double fireball, if you're familiar with NinjaDucky.
Yes!
Double fireballs, novas, stuff like that. So as a mage, especially as a human mage, Sever Ties is not a bad way to go, not because it just blocks Millstalker, but it helps you in a lot of other matchups as well. Because human mages tend to have trouble with warriors, which Sever Ties, shuts down a lot as well. So
yes.
For the most part, Wolven and warriors are the ones that human mages have the biggest hard time with. So it's a great way to tech your deck against your weakness and not lose a whole lot. So Sever Ties it's not it's not as bad as people think it is, but it's very much a tech card.
Yeah, personally, I don't think that it's floated in and out of the meta. I made the comment that it's floated in and out, which I think is true, but I don't think it has anything to do with people thinking it's a bad card. I think it's just one of those cards that people have trouble finding room for it. It's like when you build your deck, you have your strategy that you set out to do, and then you have a few extra slots at the end for teching defensively, taking out your weaknesses and stuff. And those slots these days are tending to go to things like Acid Jet and Leyline Nexus and Shriek of Vengeance. I think that people don't want to pack Sever Ties for whatever reason. I pack it in virtually all of my decks whenever I go competitively because it just is so good. But yeah, so I don't think it's that people think it's a bad card. I think that it just loses out in people's minds to other things, but it's definitely something to consider with the current sort of meta. So anyway, moving on, that's Millstalker. For a lot of these heroes, we're going to talk about how to play as them as well as against them, but I hate Millstalker, so we're not going to talk about how to do good with him, unless CwhitTastic objects.
I don't. If you guys don't want to talk about it, that's fine. I take 30 seconds. You just need a few key cards. You just need.
All right, CwhitTastic, tell us. We got CwhitTastic, the mill stalker genius over here. I won't let my personal bias get in the way of the fans getting the information that they need. So please.
I don't want hate PMs in my inbox for explaining how to play it, so I think I'll pass.
We need to create a Love Mill Stalker forum post where everyone who can publicly announce that they actually play Mill Stalker and they're proud.
All right.
I don't think a troll thread has ever been created that was trolled before it was created. Yeah, that might be the first. That might be the first.
Proud of using Millstalker in the crown match.
Yeah, that was nice.
What happened in the crown match exactly?
I was predicting who was I playing? Barca-fan would bring Victor, and Millstalker would be like the perfect counter to that. So I brought him in, even though like every other hero choice would have beaten me. But he ended up bringing a Gwen, so that was pretty much just as good.
Oh, that's even better. Gwen is just like, when Gwen sees Millstalker, it's like, good game. Have a nice day. You could just go get a coffee while I beat you now. That's fun. All right, so CwhitTastic, I hope that you will create, the I Love Millstalker thread.
Oh god.
After we get done with this episode, because I would really like to see what kind of response that gets from the community.
Yes.
But moving on then, since CwhitTastic doesn't want to get spammed with hate mail, Lance is another hero that he's a very, very versatile hero, and he can be very annoying to deal with whenever he's got, his haste power, he gets his ankle breaker going, and he can draw tons of cards off of ill-gotten gains. What are some good strategies for dealing with Lance if you're trying to overcome him in quick match?
I think that the strategy to beat Lance is ironically the exact same strategy you used to beat Gwen. Card advantage. I mean, if you can deny the advantage, then I think you're doing great. Because Lance, to me, has problems when he runs out of steam. If he does not get ill-gotten gains going on turn 4, or a hasted Aeon on turn 5 or turn 6, he runs into a lot of trouble. He runs out of steam, and it can really swing the game in your direction. So for me, card advantage. I mean, it's the same way you beat a lot of Gwen decks, because Gwen can only recurse her weapons if she has a lot of card draw, so she can resource a lot and just keep spamming Soul Seekers. So Lance is the same way. If he can't get the card advantage through ill-gotten gains or even bad Santas, he has a hard time winning a lot of matches.
I wouldn't say that Gwen really needs as much draw as Lance, though. I mean, Gwen, because of the healing, can get away with just sacking and drawing one card a turn, and it depends what kind of Gwen you're playing, but I think Gwen can stall the early game and not rely on draw to win. It's my perception, anyway.
Actually, I kind of have the inverse perception.
But we're going off topic, so sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. I don't mind going off topic. That's what the State of the Era is all about, just doing whatever. But no, actually, I kind of have the inverse perception of that. I find that with Gwen, I need a lot of cards early on. Like, once I get set up, I'm fine with just drawing 1 or 2 cards per turn forever. But because you can't ever not resource for the first 5 turns. And if you don't get to draw at least a few cards in those early turns, it's going to be really hard to not sacrifice essential things to getting your board set up the way that you want it. Whereas with Lance, if he has to stop and not sack something on turn 3 or turn 4 and just kind of top deck for 1 or 2 turns while he gets the cards that he needs, he's not really doing that terrible.
I would say it depends on which Gwen you're playing. If you're playing a Gwen that actually has cards that you want to play in the first 5 turns, then I completely agree with you. But there's also Gwen builds that have Rain Delay, Retreat, Poison Arrow, and Into the Forest, and then you can just completely ignore the first 3 turns easily and just take some damage, and then when you get your Soul Seeker out, you can just heal back up later. So it really depends on what kind of Gwen you have, in my opinion.
Okay, that's true. I'll give you that. Anyway, going back to Lance, though, how does one beat a Lance? Because I personally don't think that Gwen is a good way to do it, because I find that the item destruction plus the fact that he can stealth all of his guys makes that a matchup not unwinnable for Gwen, but for most Gwen builds certainly very difficult. What do you guys find is a good way to take him out? Sooth was saying denying draw, which can be done with any item destruction. Is there any certain archetypes that you find more effective?
My favorite archetype is a Rush Eladwin.
Oh god,
Yes.
that just wrecks Lance. Not even fun for Lance.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I remember when the ratings reset happened, when 1.5 was launched, there were a lot of, not the exact Rush style Aladdins, but they were close enough. And you saw a big uptake in Spell Eater bans being played, just so that Lance could turn the game around in the mid game to the late game to deny Aladdin the double fireball kill shot. But I have not seen a Spell Eater bans played in a while, so I'm tending to think that the unpopularity of Rush styles now has kind of given Lance a bit more freedom to breathe when it comes to his archetypes. I mean,
I still see Spell bands a little bit in quick match, but I would agree with you though. It's at least especially in tournament play, it's not as needed. I actually don't even really see too much Lance in tournament play, anyways, though, because personally, and I know Jacqui agrees with me because we talked about it before. I don't think Lance is that great of a hero. Because yeah, I know. You guys are gonna laugh.
State of the era, the only place you can hear that Lance sucks.
No, he doesn't suck. He just okay. I'll say it in this current meta.
Send the hate mail to CwhitTastic.
He loves Millstalker. He thinks Lance sucks. Man, what is up with this guy?
Lance is
he's
good.
I think he's been talking with me too much. I agree. Lance sucks.
Yes, hate mail also goes to A1 Jacqui. Just saying.
He's just not. He needs the tempo. If he doesn't have it, then he's screwed. And then going second, trying to drop down IGG, like ill-gotten gains, you can't. You lose so much, and you really need it too. Like you can only do so much as Lance going second, so that's half your games. And then going first, if you don't draw ill-gotten gains, you're screwed. So to rely on so much tempo is scary, especially when you're playing in top level tournament play when they can just rip you apart if you don't get it. And also a good point right now, I should qualify the statement that Lance quote unquote sucks. He's not that great right now because of the meta. Does Lance destroy Zal? No. Does he do great versus Madge? No. Is he good versus Aladdin? No. He has even matchups for some of the other heroes, but he's just not as dominant as he was, back when 1.5 was a little bit newer, in my opinion. And Jacqui can kind of harp on it more, but yeah.
Well, yeah, the top 3 heroes right now in the tournament scene, I think, are Magia, Zaladar, and Moonstalker, and I think they all counter Lance very well.
It's funny you should mention that Magia is a great counter to Lance, and I think that it was in the very early days of 1.5, right after ratings reset, you didn't see as much played. I mean, I remember Team Juggernaut's Razy had a ridiculously amazing Portal Magi. Playing him was the first time I saw Portal Magi work so well, and he shot up the rankings because of it. And I think that that's what actually allowed Magi to keep up with Lance and to be a great counter to Lance. Because at this point, it's all known that Lance has trouble with Portal. He can't kill it, and when you're using Portal against him, it really kind of brings him down to earth when it comes to board control. Because he can hide an ally, but between portaling and using a really aggressive style of porting Brutal Minotaurs and Shadow Knights, you can, for the most part, just ignore his allies, because we all know Lance has no healing. And other than maybe a Spell Eater band to mitigate burn, if you're just using burn for board control and portaling in just heavy allies, Lance has a hard time with that.
Well, and the trick is, that was actually going to be my example, was Portal Magia shuts down Lance pretty significantly, because Lance's whole game, CwhIT was talking about how Lance has to sacrifice a lot of tempo early on to get his setup, which is normally fine, because once he gets his setup, your guys are just never going to do anything again. Every time you drop a fatty, he hits it with Ankle Breaker, or shoots a Hasted Raven onto the board, and it's just over. You can't do anything. But the thing with Portal is that all of your allies get to do their thing before he has a chance to get rid of them. So, if you summon a Brutal Minotaur in a non-portal deck, Lance will just hit it with Ankle Breaker, or shoot it with an Assassinate, or retreat it back to your hand, or hit it with Raven. There's a billion things he could do. But if you portal it onto the board, no matter what, it's doing 6 damage, and there's nothing Lance can do about it. He can deal with it after the fact, but that 6 damage is happening.
Yep. And
that's a really big, important counter to his style of play.
And if you want to talk about Zaladar for a second, I mean, Lance is usually Lance's game is when you have control and you can drop a Fatty, a Raven, Aeon, whatever. But Zaladar is one of those heroes that can easily deal with what Lance can play down, because mind control is a bitch for Lance. And then also too, just the hasted jazz or whatever. Zal's ability and then DMT ping is the easy way to deal with the human health, 4 health. He just doesn't work as well. Okay, now that being said, the other side of the coin is Lance is very good against certain matchups, and like, this new reset that's coming up, I can see a lot of people playing Lance to counter, like, say, Amber, or things like that. So Lance does have his good matchups where he just owns, and Lance is still a great hero if you can get the setup. But yeah, I just think it's too inconsistent for my taste.
All right, so let's go to the flip side of the coin then, since we're kind of even not sure how good Lance is in the current meta. How would you play a Lance if you were going to go into quick match after the rating reset? How would you set up your Lance to try to deal with the meta that's out there?
I think, well, that's kind of funny that we talked about it a second, but I think Spellator bans would definitely be included in my Lance.
I totally agree.
Definitely, because of, not just because of Mage, but because of Zaladar too. And without giving away too much of my Lance deck, obviously Hasted Ravens are really good versus a lot of heroes. I think it's important for Lance to have more than just 7 to 8 3cc allies, because I think Lance does better when you have the option of either dropping a Fatty or dropping a couple 3cc's, because there's a lot of situations where if you choose to spend 6cc on an Aeon, it's not as good as spending 6cc on an Alden and a Jasmine. So that I like to include a little bit more of 3cc allies in my Lance deck. So it helps me be a little bit more consistent.
And helps you be resilient versus
yes.
mind control and stuff too. If you're dropping all these fatties all the time,
yep.
then Zaladar is getting huge amounts of tempo gain out of destroying them and causing them to do damage to you without having to sacrifice his board.
Yep.
Whereas if you play out lots of little guys, mind control loses a lot of. He's spending more tempo than you to kill one guy.
Definitely.
Well, I mean, I don't mind chiming on this, but I must preface any statement I have with anybody who's ever spoken to me before to ask me for any sort of deck advice. You all know that I build very, very weird decks, and my decks apparently are very difficult to run for anybody who's not me. So, yeah, Ducky can speak to this one. We had having a conversation about some of my deck designs the other day, and I don't think I've ever actually heard somebody scratch their head over the internet quite as hard as he did.
It was actually, I remember, that goes all the way back to the first time I ever played against you. I remember, like, right after I got into A1, when you were still a part of that, and the first time I ever played against you, you were like, bring your most interesting deck and fight me. And I was like, okay. So we ended up playing it was some kind of, like, Elementalist Stall versus a Zana Mournblade deck in 1.28. And it was a very bizarre matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I'm known for using awkward and obscure matchups. I mean, Jacqui also, I played him in the Crown Tournament, and he beat me soundly with his Serena deck. But yeah, I had Radiant Sunlight in the Boris deck, actually, so that deck was tech to the T. I had 3 Radiant Sunlights. Yeah, well, I had 3 Radiant Sunlights and 3 Shrine of Negatias.
Wow.
I mean,
did he tell you he was playing a priest ahead of time, or like, I mean?
No. He played Serena. I did that again. This is my style of decking of deck building, which is apparently really obscure. That I brought a Boris because I figured he was going to either bring an Amber or some sort of a weapon hero. I figure weapon heroes, their weapons are great, but they need their ability to use their weapons in order to have an advantage. So I figured the Shrine of Negatias, if he brings Amber, great for returning his weapon and, forcing him to lose tempo. And if he brings some sort of a mage or Moonstalker, which I knew was another possibility, it also shuts him down as a Moonstalker. So I figured that right there shuts down 2 matchups for me that he's likely to bring, so that's worth a shot. And the Radiant Sunlight was a late addition for me because it shuts down both Moonstalker, Amber, and Serena as well. Because Serena, for her to really get advantage, she needs to be able to use his ability to one-shot 3-cost allies and to get card advantage by forcing you to sacrifice a card from your hand. And Radiant Sunlight, it's cheap and it slows down your opponent. And as Boris, I can already get rid of anything less than 5 cost instantly with his ability. Attacking sandworms and aeons and stuff, I could dominate the board pretty well with that. So just denying his ability and his draw engine, which also Radiant Sunlight shuts down Lance as well, because he cannot haste anything if you keep using Radiant Sunlight on him. I had Priest of Light as well, so it again, particularly awkward design. I swear they work. I promise. I swear they work. But
I mean, I've
If you're
seen
using
them
Priest
in
of the
action.
Light with it.
yeah,
Sorry.
Priest of the Light is an annoying card if people make use of it correctly.
Yeah.
Pain.
Every time someone mentions Priest of the Light, the first name that pops into my head is Busty, because he always does this to me. And anyone in A1 who's seen our matches that we just play randomly can attest to this. He will do. There's one time I was playing his Boris versus my Lance, and he managed to play, I think, 7 times he played Priest of the Light, between playing all 4 of them that he managed to draw in his deck, and he retreated at least 2 or 3 of them. So there were some turns where he would just, he would dump down 2 Priests of the Light, and then the next turn he'd retreat a Priest of the Light and play it again, and Busty, if you're listening, I still am annoyed at that, so you gotta stop hacking.
Well, I mean, okay. Well, to answer the question about using Lance in the upcoming meta, well,
Right.
You can expect a lot of mages and a lot of Zaldars, and how to use it. How to tech your deck for it. Obviously, Spell Your Bands was said. Spell Your Bands is a great way to go. Including a couple of 1 or 2 Sever Ties. You might not be a bad way to go, or including 1 or 2 cards that you wouldn't usually include. It might not be a bad way to go, because as Lance, you can technically squeeze the room in a Lance deck a little bit easier than you could in some other decks.
I would encourage
A lot
using
of
Black Garb over Severed Ties.
yeah, Black Garby is a great one. Black
Yeah.
Garby is a great one.
Because I mean, Severed Ties is great, but Lance actually does good against the heroes that you would use Severed Ties on. Except maybe
Boris can be tough without Severed Ties. I've played a lot against Busty. We've had a lot of Boris Lance matchups, and if you can't either kill that early Blood Frenzy or you can't kill the Enrage later on in the game, that can actually be extremely difficult to win.
So you guys aren't expecting the Amber, Zana, Boris to pick up in the race for the top, seeing as those heroes made it really far in the World Championship?
I don't expect any
Absolutely.
Xanas in the top 20.
Ooh.
But do you expect there to be people? Do you expect to have to beat Zana to get to the top 20?
Possibly, but I don't think they'll make it that far.
I actually personally am going to have to agree with that, because I think that Zana's really great all-around hero, but her weakness is fast decks. Eclipse took her all the way through the World Championship top 32. It was actually a brilliant read on the meta, where everyone was slowing down their decks. I mean, we were seeing Magia decks that didn't have turn 2 creature drops and things, and in a slow game, a Priest is the ultimate class to be playing. But I think you're going to see a lot of faster decks, a lot of Portal Magias, a lot of Rush Aladwins and Ambers. So I don't think that... I agree with Jacqui on that. I don't think a Zana's going to go to the top.
It's also true that in Quick Match, the faster you can play your game, the faster you can move up the ladder, too. If you're playing 3 games an hour, if you're playing a slow deck, you're not going to move as many ratings up as if you're playing a race deck where you can get 5 or 6 wins in an hour.
And another thing to touch on, too, in general, for a general Quick Match design, is that in Shadow Era, we have a lot of cards that counter certain strategies or other things, but we don't have sideboards. So one of the things that's problematic with playing slower control-style decks in Quick Match is that you can face literally anything, so it's very hard to have the correct tools to counter the opponent's strategy. So it's much, much better if you can play a faster aggro deck that just can. The more you can ignore your opponent's strategy, the more successful you'll be in quick match overall.
I went on the record when you guys had me from Origins as saying that Zana is, a severely underrated hero, and I'm particularly proud that Eclipse proved me right. So yay, shout out Eclipse. But I actually think that there's a good chance that not many, but maybe one or two decent Zana builds will actually have a good shot at the top 20. I mean, maybe not the Eclipse version. Eclipse version was very, very tech for tournament meta exclusively. And we saw an uptake of Zana builds after that, which doesn't surprise anybody. But I think that Zana does have a shot, because we've all said at one point or another, Zana is one of the few heroes that has almost no terrible matchups. She has enough healing to come back from rush decks, and she can really kind of control enough to kind of hang around long enough to really kind of get her style to work. I mean, is she a great hero? Not as strong as some of the others, but put her in the hands of a seasoned veteran player who kind of knows how to really build around her, you can see some pretty decent wins out of it. But, I mean, I run the leaderboard, the 1.5 leaderboard on the forum, and I can tell I've seen a lot more really strong Zana streaks lately. 14, 15 games in a row.
That's interesting.
So I only partially disagree with that statement. I'll go on the record of saying for the last 4 months or so, I've been saying Zana is the only tier 1 hero in the game right now.
That's true. I can verify that. He has said that a lot.
But I still don't think she's going to make the top 20.
Now, how does that work exactly? Zana's the only hero who's truly tier 1, but she's not making it to the leaderboard. I want to hear this logic. I'm curious.
Because everyone's going to try to build Eclipse's deck, and it's too slow to handle what I think the meta is going to be for the rush to the top 20, which is going to be a lot of rush decks.
I agree.
I'm going to try and prove you wrong. I'm going to make an attempt to actually prove you wrong.
The fact that you win slower as Zana is going to make it harder to get to the top. So even though she might win, let's just assume that she is tier 1, but she's still only winning 3 games an hour, like I said before. I mean, you're still going to be hard-pressed to get enough wins to compete with the decks.
Well, I disagree with the speed, because if you look at the current top 20, I think in the place number 2 or number 4, something like that, Sisyphus is up there. And you guys all know Sisyphus, he's known for Banebow. Nobody in the world knows how to play Banebow better than Sisyphus. And Banebow is not a fast hero. He's not. And from what I've seen of Sisyphus's build, he doesn't really run many Bad Santas for speed, or he carries a couple of sacrificial lambs, but he just controls the game and uses that control and Banebow's ability in cycling Shadow Knights, Molten Destroyers or whatever it is, he rotates depending upon the meta. And he, during this last reset, he didn't play at all with his main account for the first 2 days, which during a reset is tandem to raiding Suicide. But come day 3, he busted out his tuned and perfected Banebow and laughed at everybody. He shot to 370 something. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
I think it's.
I don't think speed matters as much.
I think it's important to note that I agree that speed doesn't matter, because as someone who took part in it for the whole time the climb was happening, it changed over a course of 2 to 2.5 weeks. So really, I don't think. I mean, it's not that big of a deal if it's a little bit slower hero, in my opinion, because I mean, just from my own personal experience, I know other people who climbed with me. There were, after a week and a half, I actually fell out of the top 20, and then just got another streak in the next week or so, playing 5 to 10 games a day, and just go on a streak, and then just kind of slowly climbed back up. So it's not. I don't know. I guess it varies. If you have a really high win percentage, then you can play it pretty slow and still make the top 20.
I think one of the keys there is that the game has a lot more players now than it used to. With 1.5, I mean, we had a discussion in the A1 forums about this, where I made a comment that you have to get to the top 20 within the first week or 2, or you're never going to be able to make it. And people were pointing out to me that that wasn't really true, because there was still variance happening in the top 20 for the first almost month that the game was out, or that the version was out.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that just has to do with there are a lot more people playing now.
Yeah.
So you can have... The issue always was that everyone would get up to like an above 300 rating, and they'd get as far as they think they can get, and then they would just stop. So then if you started to climb after that, once you got up to like the high 200s, there would just be nobody to play against that was higher than you, so you couldn't beat that curve anymore. But I think now that with so many more people playing and trying for longer, you're still able to get those rating points in a way that you wouldn't have been in the past.
Well, there is a certain MILF stalker running around right now that's getting pretty close to the top 20.
Yep.
That's true. Okay, so let's move on now to another category of heroes that we see a whole lot, and people either love it or hate it every time. Mages. And in a special particular, Magia. Portal Magia is a very fierce deck. It's very difficult to deal with, and a rush-based Eladrin can also be very difficult to deal with. Even though no one's really playing a whole lot of him right now, Gravebone has a lot of potential, I think, in Quick Match. So how do you deal with these crazy mage decks and all of their shenanigans?
One way to deal with mage is to force them to use some of the burn to help control the board, as long as you can still kind of like really fight for the board and maintain it. I think that helps a little bit when playing. Well, I guess that depends, but if you guys can see what I'm saying, like if you can
use your allies as a meat shields.
Exactly.
Basically.
Yeah, you want to. Yeah, and if you always have a little bit of control of the board and force them to keep using the burn, that's one way.
Especially with allies that have 5 or more life, if you can drop one of those, then it'll force them to either Nova or use up to 2 direct effects to get rid of it.
That's also true.
Unless they're using Portal, I mean, then it's a whole different equation. So Shriek is good against that if you're Shadow, of course.
Another really easy way is healing. Healing's really huge against Mage. So you have heroes that can use Soul Seeker, or you have like Zaladar that can use Soul Reaper. Those are really good ways.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and say it now. I think that Gwen, if you expect to see a lot of mages, you should be playing with Gwen, because if you practice a lot and you have a good solid Gwen build, mages should not ever be able to beat you, because they can deal damage faster than any mage can, and she also can heal, and the combination of those two things it's impossible to deal with as a mage.
I think mage's 2 main weaknesses are obviously weapon decks. Gwen decks, Amber decks are really, really tough to beat as a mage. But on top of that, allies that have damage reduction. Gargoyles are annoyingly hard for Magi decks, for Gravebone decks, for even Eladwins. They're annoyingly difficult for them to get rid of damage reduction. Sandworms are just near impossible.
Sandworms are the bane of my existence as a Magia player, just so you know.
Yeah, most mage decks, if they see a Sandworm plate, they just ignore it.
Yep.
Because it's not worth their effort to try and get rid of it, because it'll take maybe 3 spells to get rid of it, or a Fireball and a Nova, and it's just not worth their effort to try and get rid of it. The Sandworm is a great counter.
Every deck of mine has 3 Sandworms, and they all get saved against the mages. I play all 3 of them.
You're a terrible person.
I never sack a Sandworm.
There's nothing, honestly, there's nothing more disheartening to me as a mage player. Like, I see someone drop a Sandworm, and I'm like, okay, that sucks. I'm probably going to have to ignore that, throw a Clinging Web on it or something, and I'm just going to try to outrace the Sandworm because he only does 2 damage. But then sometimes, people like Jacqui will just drop a second Sandworm, and then I'm like, oh, great. Okay, so you're just going to kill every creature that I drop instantly, and I can't possibly... I mean, the amount of damage it would take to kill 2 Sandworms, I could kill 3 heroes with that amount of damage. So
3 heroes.
Can't you you could always pop it with Magi, do 1, and then drop out your Brutal Minotaur through a portal and take out the Sandworm.
Yeah, that's true. The thing is, and I guess this is something that's a little particular to my builds. I tend not to use Brutal Minotaur very heavily in Portal decks, even though it's like the thing to do, because I don't want to end up relying on it and then find myself against Zaladar. Because if
I mean,
you
the other thing is, well, just webbing it or freezing it. I mean, those cards can be quite good in a Majaya deck to tech against sandworms, for example. At least that's my
That's true.
perception. I won't claim that I'm a top Majaya player, but I do like playing Portal Majaya. It's
Yeah,
fun.
no, I completely agree. Actually, I spend a lot of time playing Clinging Webs in all of my mage decks, and Sandworm is one of the primary reasons. That between Sandworm and Brutal Minotaurs or Plasma Behemoths behind Moonstalker Stealth, for those two things, having a Clinging Web is like almost mandatory for me. So, the last archetype I'd like to kind of go over here, Zaladar. Very strong, very versatile deck. He can be built a billion different archetypes. What do you guys think would be the best way to play Zaladar if you're setting up for quick match?
For a quick match, it'd be good to be able to. I mean, some people might disagree with me, but I like for a quick match Zaladar to be a little bit varied. So I enjoy putting in some Severed Ties, some Soul Reaper, some Leyline Nexus, maybe a Shriek. Just having a wide variety, because in my opinion, Zaladar is one of those heroes that you can have a lot of variables with him, and he'll do well in a lot of different scenarios. It's not like you have to have a certain setup to win with Zaladar, in my opinion. As for allies, I enjoy, obviously DMT with Zaldar's ability is great for 4 health allies. Garg's always a must. I like Plasma Behemoth in my Zaladars because they're great versus a lot of his bad matchups. That's a huge key, in my opinion, is having some nice PBs in your Zal.
I've seen a lot of Zaldar decks run recently that do not use Bazaar as a draw engine. I think you can get away with that, especially with the modern Zaldar decks. You can definitely get away with not having Bazaars out. 4 Best Antas would obviously be a must then. 3 or 4 Shadow Fonts is always a great way to go. You hit on something that I think is a great way to play Zaldar. Carrying a couple Sever Ties is a perfect fit for Zaldar decks, because his weakest matchup are strong weapon heroes. Are like Ember and especially Gwen. Gwen is a terrible for Zaladar.
Yes.
And I mean, carrying Sever Ties just so you can shut down Rapid Fire is a huge boost for Zaladar against a Gwen matchup. It's still going to be difficult, but it's going to give you, a dog in the fight, if you will.
Yep. It's also key versus Moonstalker, too. Sever Ties is great for Moonstalker.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep, I agree with everything said here. All right, so moving on from the quick match talk, hopefully that gets you guys listening out there prepared for the meta if you had any questions or wondered anything, because I see in our listener questions this week we had at least half of them were about quick match and getting ready for quick match. So hopefully this is our nice little ratings reset primer for you guys. Now, moving on from that, I'd like to take this time, since we have 2 members of the design team here, and we have Sebastian, who is, one of the primary card designers for the set. He's the guy who is coming up with a lot of the basic designs that, we end up seeing in play at the end of the day. One of the listener questions that we had was about the 3 basic TCG archetypes: control, aggro, and combo. We don't really have a whole lot of combo in Shadow Era right now, but as far as control and aggro, how, from a design perspective, do you guys balance and manage those things and try to keep them on par with each other, and how do they interact with each other now and possibly in the future?
Wait. Before the design team answers that question, for players who are newer to TCGs like I am, can you really quick, for my noobish, just explain the difference between those? I've never even heard some of those terms.
Okay, yes, good point. All right, so if you don't know what we're talking about, the 3 basic archetypes that you see in pretty much all TCGs, you're going to have control decks, aggro decks, and combo decks. A control deck is the type of deck that tries to get a hold on the game and negate the things that your opponent is doing until eventually you're able to create a game state where you're going to win and there's nothing your opponent can do about it. Zana would be a really good example of a control deck in Shadow Era.
Okay.
You have aggro decks, which is short for aggression or aggressive, and it's basically just the type of deck that puts out threats of some kind and just is super aggressive and just hits you in the face again and again and again and again until you're dead. It's the opposite of a control deck, where instead of spending all of this time trying to negate what your opponent is doing, you're trying to just wind up and punch it as hard as you can and just break through it and kill them before they kill you. Portal Magia or Russia Ladwin would be really good examples of aggro decks in Shadow Era.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then combo decks is something that we don't really have in Shadow Era right now, but that's where you're building up some crazy interaction that you have multiple pieces of it, and as soon as all of those pieces are in play, you're going to do some crazy, crazy thing on like turn 10 or something, and it's just going to instantly kill your opponent no matter what.
Cool, okay.
And we don't really have anything like that in Shadow Era. If you've played other TCGs like Magic the Gathering, you know things like Dragonstorm or Battle of Wits. These are more combo type decks.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's that. And design team. How do these things interact right now? And what's your design philosophies for keeping these things balanced with each other?
I tend to think that what you define as a combo style is a sub-style of control. Because in order to get the combo style to work, it's an instant win type of archetype, where you're playing for an instant win condition that you're not worried about what your opponent's doing as much. You're setting up a scenario for you to get your instant win. But in order for you to get that to work, you have to control the game so that they don't steamroll you before then. So I tend to think it's a take on a control type of archetype. But I wouldn't categorize it separately, because each different card game handles it differently. But they all have some element of control in it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. But,
well, you have some element of survivability, not necessarily control, though. I mean, a combo deck, for example, could, if there was a whole bunch of healing in the game, and say you were playing a Dragonstorm deck, you don't actually have to remove your opponent's threats. They can build up a billion threats as long as you can get enough life to survive until your combo goes off. That's all that matters. A control deck, you can actually lose control of the game. A combo deck, you have never lost as long as you still have 1 HP and could potentially set off your combo.
Okay. Well, Raz, I believe this question is being lobbed at you.
Okay. Well, I would say that from my perspective, I would actually kind of divide the archetypes up a little bit differently. But between the rush type or aggro and control, I would say that you also have to consider the stall or late game plays as well, which I would put at a slower pace than the control decks. And I think there's a very soft rock, paper, scissors that goes on between those three in general. So if you're playing a race deck, then if you go up against a control deck, if the control deck is unprepared for the race deck, then you should probably have a pretty good chance. But a control deck that focuses on control should be able, in general, to have a good chance of beating a race deck. However, a stall mill or late game build that comes up against a race deck, the race deck is probably going to have a little bit more chance of winning than the stall deck by design, because the stall deck is trying to play for more of the late game. And conversely, the control deck coming up against the stall deck, which I guess in the current meta you could see is like Majaya without any 2CC allies coming up against the Zana in the World Championship. I mean, when you're playing for a slightly slower game than the deck you're facing, you generally have a slight advantage against that kind of a deck. So when we're looking at the game and we're designing for it, we are looking at combos. What we don't have, and I really don't think want to have, is something where you can put out 2 cards and it doesn't matter what the opponent is doing. If you get those 2 cards out, you win. And we want to make sure that there is this back and forth dialogue between the players, that you're not just having an autopilot. But there is a lot of combos that do exist that are maybe not instant wins, but they do work well in terms of synergies together or work together. I think a lot of decks are built around that kind of concept. And I would say that there's also other types of divisions we're looking at, like weenies versus a fatty build, and then solo versus soft ally support or heavy ally, and with still some weapons. So there's different spectrums in that regard. And then the weenie and fatty, you could also look at that from the perspective of low resource games and high resource games. So decks that want to work under a certain kind of casting cost range, and others that want to work above. And of course, typically those tend to be grouped or be associated to race and the later mill stall types of decks. So I think there's something like 6 or 7 different kinds of archetypes, and Sooth also had a post that he put on the forum way back that went into those archetypes too.
Right, and to some extent it depends on the zoom level of your microscope, I guess, because pretty much everything we're talking about could be summarized as control, aggro, or combo, but when you get a little bit closer, you start to see a lot more divisions within those categories, I think.
I wouldn't really put combo in there, at least for Shadow Era. I would say
not
that
for Shadow.
I would say that it is 3, but I wouldn't say that it's combo as the third. I would say that it would be
stall,
fast, medium speed, and slow speed. And if you want to just make a very generic cut into only 3, then that would probably be my 3. And you can call that aggro, control, and stall, or stall could also be mill, or could just be late game, because sometimes it's not a stall or a mill. It's just that you're packing lots of 5+ cards.
That's true. That's an interesting take on that from the lead card designer. That is how the guy who comes up with a lot of the stuff that we see thinks about the game, that's very interesting. Also, I forgot to mention the guy who asked this question was Von Osnabrück. So shout out to you, Von, for asking that question. Moving on to some other listener questions here. Trying to see which ones aren't actually related to Quick Match, because I think we covered all of those. Wow, these are all about Quick Match. Okay, actually, this isn't in the listener questions, but I remember in a few episodes back somebody asked this. I'm sorry, whoever you are, I forget what your name is, but we still love you. Question for Sebastian. You have archetypes like stall that are always prevalent in Shadow Era, and it seems like everybody is always trying to say that they're going to wipe it out because it's really annoying to play against, and it always comes back stronger than it was in the previous version. Do you think that's a trend that's going to continue, or is that something that eventually will be looked at?
Well, I think that there's 2 types of stalling, and I think there's a type of stalling which you don't want to have, which is where it's a type of stalling where the game just becomes very long, and the opponent just sits there hitting end turn because they can't do anything, or a game where it just feels like it's autopilot, like you might as well not be there. And those kinds of stalls are the type of stalls that I am hoping that there'll be enough kinds of solutions to create still that dynamic dialogue between the 2 players. Then there's the other type of stall, which is it's not necessarily a stalling, it's just a form of control that plays more for the late game. And you can have a very exciting dialogue that happens between the players in that regard. So if you take a priest deck that like Xana, who heals a lot, you could consider it a stall because Xana is healing, but there's still a dialogue that happens in the game. It's not like Millstalker, where someone might find a Millstalker match to be very boring against a Xana. It's usually quite exciting. It's like, okay, I need to tempt out the tidal wave. Now there's a Wisdom Staff. I need to take that out. So there's things that the other player needs to do in order to beat the Xana, and it's not just a deadlock where you're just like, oh, person's stealth. I guess I just have to hit end turn. Oh, guess what? They're hiding again. Okay, I'll end turn again. Those kinds of helplessness situations in a stall is what we definitely are always looking at that and looking for ways to either help a certain hero or help the game in general to avoid those kinds of deadlock situations. And the other thing that will help stall in the future, if you've got a mill stalker who's trying to mill your deck, well, if you're going to mill the deck and it's going to take 20 minutes to do it, that's going to be just a really slow experience. But if it's a mill deck, then maybe there's ways to accelerate the game so that it's still a stall type game, but it doesn't need to be 20 minutes. Maybe it can still be a 10-minute game, even though you're stalling.
That would be awesome. And so it is something that's being looked at, guys, that this reign of terror of the really super boring games will be over.
Well, do you mind if I chime you mind if I
Sure.
chime in
I
here
was
with
I was just going to say that we're with the PFG. It's one of the things that we really are looking at to get feedback on is like what kinds of really annoying combinations can you think of as you're going through these new cards that might create these stall situations. And then if we see those problems, then we definitely try and solve them either within the current card pools of new cards that are being made, or by new cards that are designed for the future if it's too late for the current set because it's already been printed.
Absolutely. See, well, the only thing that I was going to add is I think the reason that stalls become prevalent is because of the limited card pool so far, where we face it, we're only still on the first set. So out of 200 cards, people are trying to find variety of play styles, and milling is a radically different playstyle than either control or aggro, which are the two other main playstyles. So I think as the game goes and we reveal more cards and we have more sets coming out, there'll be more variety of styles, so that people will be less drawn to it because it'll become more and more of a niche style, where there's more and more interesting and fun and unique styles people to play as.
Yeah, and that's something to also mention. I mean, one thing that we really did in 1.5 in the first PFG group, so the 1.5 is the final balancing that we did on the core set. We really wanted to create a good foundation for going forward, and unfortunately, or fortunately, what that meant is that we really tried to focus on the control style as being the foundation, and because if you have a race as being the top in the meta and you don't have a way to counter it, it can destabilize the whole game going forward. So we really wanted to focus first on the control meta, and then from there expand out and progressively add all the other archetypes into it, whether it be denial, rush, weenie builds, stall, mill, etc. I mean, there's a lot of other, or solo. Solo has taken a little bit of a hit recently. It's not as popular. Solo being hero with no allies, and those are definitely archetypes that we are making a conscious effort to develop further as new cards are released.
I think that Kevin and Caitlin Zero both just got really happy to hear that.
Yeah, seriously.
Solo builds are being looked at for viability in the future. All right, well, that's, I think, about all the time we have today. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to us ranting about all the different quick match meta things and whatnot. Let's go back over to the discussion thread now in the ShadowEra.com forums. Let's talk about quick match. What are you guys expecting to see? What are you hoping to see? What are you hoping you don't see? Let's see if we can brainstorm a little bit and have the Shadow Era forum players beating out the greater meta and getting us all into the top 20 on the leaderboards. I want to thank Sooth, Jacqui, and Sebastian for all being here pretty last minute. Thank you guys for coming on.
I could just give one little update on like the spoiler planning for the expansion, if you'd like.
Oh, absolutely. We always love spoilers and things on State of the Era.
So I'm not going to make an actual spoiler. I'm just talking about what we have spoiled and what's coming up next week. So JDC and Nacho Ches just did a blog post on our design team blog, giving some background story, both the prologue of the core set and then the leading into the epilogue and prologue of the expansion. And then for this next week, what we have planned to post on our design team blog is a post that will go over the expansion as a whole and kind of talk about the general themes that we'll see in it and some of the reasoning and thought process behind what are some of the general broad stroke trends that we'll see in the expansion. So it won't have any specific card details yet. We're kind of working from broad picture to details. But hopefully this next post next week will water our mouths and taste buds a little bit more as we get closer and closer to revealing more specifics.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Something exciting to look forward to. All right, well, I think that's just about our episode, guys. So until next time, this is the A1 Alliance signing out.